Hello to everybody. I'm really happy to greet all the participants of the summit. My name is Liudmyla Gryzun. I'm a full professor of Information Systems Department of Kharkiv National University of Economics, Kharkiv City, Ukraine. Today, I'd like to tackle the problem, the COVID-19 pandemic and training of the university newcomers. Why this topic is really urgent? The matter is that the complex reality during the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdowns has caused drastic changes in all fields of our lives and definitely influenced a lot of the educational processes. In fact, there were lots of periods during pandemic when distant learning and online meetings were the only feasible solution for group communication in many educational establishments. Schools and higher education institutions had to cancel face-to-face classes, including lectures, labs, workshops, and other learning experiences, and moved to online education using Zoom and other learning management systems. Indeed, distant and blended learning, which has been used for a long time before, has had many benefits, especially enabled flexibility of teaching and learning anywhere and anytime. However, recent studies have suggested significant differences between well-planned and carefully designed online studying and sessions held in response to a crisis or disasters. Moreover, in emergency situations, these designed processes are absent, in fact. So it's not occasionally that number of pedagogical research appeared which analyzed the impact of the transition of digitally mediated communication on the process of learning, on its results and the participants' experience. Recent studies indicated several students' difficulties and limitations of online learning during COVID pandemic. These difficulties are common for the majority of university students, and their overcoming is really challenging for teaching and education staff. However, among the whole university community, I'd like to distinguish special group of students who need a really special attention. These are university newcomers or first-year students who have entered university during the pandemic. I'm a university professor who has among the students a lot of newcomers and who has experienced the peculiarities of teaching them on conditions of emergency of online learning. So I realized quite quickly that these students are a really vulnerable category of trainees, and they need special attitude, special support and methods of teaching in this situation. And I started thinking what I personally can contribute into the solution of the problem for my own students, and maybe my ideas, didactic techniques, my personal experience might be interesting and beneficial for the global community of the university professors who bump with similar difficulties. To start with, firstly, I decided to realize true challenges and learning difficulties of my newcomers in order to be aware as for their problems to find out best solutions. So I built the profile of a university newcomer, answering the set of questions. What kind of person are they? What is their background? What were their conditions of studying, social life, community before the university? How are they changed at university? What are their targets, motivation, ambitions, etc.? What are their potential challenges in the current conditions of studying at a new place and at online learning during COVID pandemic? Answering these questions, we could conclude that a typical university newcomer is a yesterday high school or college trainee who is not a teenager yet, but not an adult person. They are definitely more determined and motivated than school children, but still need to be stimulated to be interested in the subject of learning. And before the university, the conditions of studying and academic success were completely habitual and clear for them. At university, newcomers bump with lots of novelties at studying the enormous capacity of new information and higher demands to the level of their knowledge and skills, unusual forms of study and the variety of these forms of study, unusual and special system of assessment, points and grades of their academic achievements, advanced teaching staff who are mostly top-level scientists and researchers, and definitely it is a completely new students community. And all of these unusual aspects for new university newcomers are complicated with the peculiarities and features of online learning. Instead of eye-to-eye, emotional and fruitful communication with the teacher, they obtained only distant contact with the teacher, who is separated from you and cannot give trainees immediate feedback to some unclear and challenging points of the material. The newcomers also appear to be physically disconnected from their group mates, which makes impossible for them to overcome current difficulties in learning, to explain to each other something in really simple words on some primitive examples. Finally, they feel the lack of common verbal communication because, like all of us, they appear to be isolated and deprived of habitual social life. Thus, after building the profile of my newcomer students, I realized perfectly well my own challenges as a teacher who is aimed at providing educational process in the best way under such conditions and assist newcomers to be adapted quicker, to facilitate their studying in this challenging situation, and at the same time to give them necessary knowledge and skills which make their basis for all the future studying at university and maybe for all of their professional lives. So I decided to apply some special didactic techniques and teaching methods in order to break ice between the teacher and the participants and among them as well, if it's possible, to promote their interaction, to involve them, at least virtually, into special kinds of activity which are beneficial for their active learning and can lead finally to the deep understanding of the complicated problems, and on the other hand, to compensate the lack of habitual communication. Here, I have to mention that I train the pre-service IT specialists and we learn with them in their first year quite difficult and important subjects like basics of algorithmizations, introduction to their major, etc. According to the curriculum, there are expected lectures, labs, and independent work within the subject. All the materials and tasks are available on the university platform of distant learning, and the all online classes are held in Zoom servers. These are the common regulations and conditions of studying at my university during the pandemic. So in these conditions, firstly, preparing the course materials are distinguished some theoretical and practical issues which can be learned by the students individually and in small groups, and the task for them was to prepare the presentation which had to cover specific list of issues. So the students were provided with the list of the topics for presentations and their common outlines. Then, during lecture classes on the specific topics, I organized mini conferences where each small group of students delivered via Zoom their presentation, while the rest of the group were so-called active listeners who had to find out answers to some questions during listening. After each presentation, I organized a sort of a discussion based on the presentation. It was a question-answer session between the group of presenters and group of listeners. In the end, I usually summed up the discussion. As for my own observations, the students revealed great enthusiasm, responsibility, and concentration of attention, which is quite difficult to achieve during typical online lecture. All the students prepared their presentation, applying some Additional materials included some extra visualization to clarify some complicated issues. They tried to follow the outline of the presentation and covered all the necessary issues. And they even explained why sometimes they couldn't cover some of the issues. The listeners were active enough in asking questions and in the interaction with their peers. It was obvious that they were concentrated during the listening to the presentation and tried to extract much important information to apply it in future and to exchange their knowledge with others. Presentation and participation in discussion both were estimated according to a specially prepared scale. Second technique which I applied is beneficial for online labs and practical classes. Typically, students have to have the set of tasks for each laboratory work to solve them individually, to prepare the report as for the progress of the solution, results and conclusions. These reports are submitted by the students into the personal distant platform where the teacher of the course checks it, assesses, leaves the comments, etc. So the typical process is rather impersonal and complicated as for the teacher's immediate feedback and assistance in difficult situations. Bumping with learning difficulties, unfortunately, students are demotivated, they waste time, they lose their interest and finally fail. I decided to improve it by discussing the students' solutions and checking their reports in special way. During online labs, I allowed students to share the screens with their solutions and they could ask me the questions, if any. We could discuss advantages and disadvantages of their solutions together with other students and correct mistakes during their potential consequences. During such labs and practical sessions, I noticed that the students were eager to comment everything on their screens. They tried to explain in their own words the steps of their solutions and were open to my questions and their group mates' questions. Definitely, they were rewarded with extra points for their active explanations. But in such a way, they also compensated their lack of verbal communication. And at the same time, while sound in their solutions, they could realize deeper the peculiarities of the learning material and obtain strong skills. It was also really beneficial for weak students who had difficulties because they could learn a lot from their peers' simple explanations and it facilitated their understanding. Also, I'd like to emphasize that such techniques for online learning helped a lot shy and unconfident students as they felt themselves more comfortable and psychologically more protected, being in their habitual surrounding. And during the labs and consultations, they felt free to reveal their knowledge in a private chat with the teacher, to ask questions and receive my immediate answers. Thus, the didactic techniques which I applied at the online lectures and labs were really beneficial for university newcomers because, in fact, they were involved into active participation in the educational process, which included individual knowledge mining, knowledge and skills demonstrations for peers, and finally, self-estimation and peers estimation, which allowed to reduce limitations of online learning for newcomers and make smoothly their adaptation to university study. At least I could find it out from their feedback. And I was really happy and satisfied because it was really challenging and rewarding at the same time, both for me and for my students. To sum up sharing my experience, I'd like to say about something that it was difficult or even impossible maybe to overcome. The tasks that I offered the students, unfortunately, not always matched their level, and sometimes they were too difficult for them. And on conditions of online learning, it was impossible to notice it immediately and to decrease the level of the task, or just opposite, to give something more more advanced. It took some time to adapt it for this exact student. However, on the whole, our experience seems to be positive and beneficial, as I did my best to use all the facilities and advantages of the online learning and to reduce its limitation to support university newcomers. I hope that my personal experience might be beneficial for the global community of the university professors who train newcomers. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you.